The Black Library book, Brothers of the Snake, is an awesome story by Dan Abnett based on the Iron Snakes chapter. This is really a character-driven book that primarily follows Priad as he's forced into a squad leader position within the Iron Snakes chapter, and not only has to face the external threats that Space Marines typically have to face, but also has to deal with the burden of leadership, like when he loses squad members. Because this book mostly follows one squad of Space Marines, a lot of the stories would really translate well into kill team matches. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a lot of parts of this book and turning them into kill team missions. And we aren't covering every mission here, just some of my favorites and ones that I think would turn into kill team matches really easily. And a quick shout out to the Battle Brothers Tabletop Book Club here on his Discord. That's where I heard of this book from his recommendation, so I wanted to give him a quick shout out. So let's go ahead and look at the rules. So in these missions, obviously everyone will include the Iron Snakes chapter, which they're an Ultramarine successor chapter. So it never specifically says what type of Marine they are, but I read them as either tactical or intercessor Marines. So I would run one of those two. And if you're doing intercessors, I would just use the new rules because they're flat out more interesting. And in that case, for chapter tactics, I would choose methodical and acrid. Changing that won't have any major implications if you disagree with me and want to use something else. So the other special rule for this squad is your leader will always have a lightning claw equipped. This is 5 attacks, 2 up, 4/5 damage, and lethal 5 up. They get their other warrior as well, but they just also have the lightning claw. So we're not doing a mission over the first chapter because it's just a solo mission, and one Space Marine and then some Dark Eldar doesn't really work for kill team. So we're going straight to part 2, which is Black Gold, Undertaking the Rosetta. This mission will be a Space Marine team as the attackers, and the defenders will be Traitor Space Marines with the Dark Tusk as their legion. Preferably have one of the fire teams be cultists and one fire team being Chaos Space Marines. And this mission is largely based off the Destroy Foundations mission in the Shanath set. This means there will be 4 objective markers that are either in the middle of the map or on the Chaos side. And the Space Marines are trying to destroy them to stop the demonic presence there from awakening. The Space Marines can arm explosives at these locations, and then the Chaos team can defuse them. At the end of each turning point, if there was an armed objective marker, remove it from the board. The Space Marine player can choose one Marine to have an explosives expert, which means they can plant explosives for 0 AP, and then one Chaos Space Marine can have the Headhunter ability, which means that if he kills the enemy leader, you automatically gain 1 command point. The next mission will be White Heat, Undertaking the Eden. This mission is supposed to replicate the Iron Snakes getting to the explosives during this mission, and then trying to get away with them. So the attackers will be the Space Marines, and the defenders will be Dark Eldar. So in this mission, the Dark Eldar placed explosives in a key area, and the Space Marines have to get those explosives out of that area. So that's what you're trying to replicate during this mission. So the Space Marines will have the ability to choose Librarian Petrock. He'll have the same stats as your standard trooper, but he'll also have the Psyker keyword and have the ability to manifest psychic powers. So beyond being able to use his Psyker powers, he'll also have the melee weapon, Belus, since that's his Psyker-infused sword. So he'll have a better range profile with his Psyker ability and his better sword. So the advantage the Dark Eldar will have, because the Space Marines were constantly pushing forward, is that the Space Marines do not get to place barricades at the start of this mission. So for this mission, there'll be 4 objective markers that start within the defender's half of the board, and these can be picked up. At the end of the match, for each marker on your side of the board, you gain 4 victory points. So the Space Marines are trying to move the markers away, and the Dark Eldar are trying to keep them where they start. So for our next mission, it will be Red Rain, Undertaking to Ceres. So here, the Iron Snakes are once again facing off against Chaos. They're attacked by a fast-moving demon that's summoned by a local Chaos cult, and this cult is trying to sacrifice a Space Marine to summon a more powerful demon. So this mission goes pretty far into homebrew territory, and it's probably the farthest out there as far as something you wouldn't really see in one of the Kill Team mission books. So the Space Marines will be the attackers, and the defenders will be a Chaos cult. But this cult will be one cultist fire team from the Heretic Space Marine team, and then you run one demon. I believe in the book this is supposed to be one of those Corn Hounds, so if you have something that looks like that or one of those models, I would use that for the mini. Also pick one cultist to be your leader, in case that becomes relevant for something like attack op. So the demon stats will be 6 movement, 4 APL, GA1, defense 3, save 6 up, and 18 wounds. It will have a 5+ demon save, but it will also have the ability hard to pin down, which means if it's not injured and it's not within 3 inches of an enemy operative, its demon save improves to 3 up. But it also has the ability sudden movement, which that means before it activates, it can perform a free dash, and that does happen outside of activation. The mission here is there are 2 points that can't be moved that are just standard objectives. Whoever has the most APL on them gets 1 victory point at the end of each turning point. These are like strategically important positions on the battlefield. But there's also one objective that's the captured Space Marine. This objective is able to be picked up and moved by any model other than the demon, and whoever has the most APL near this objective, at the end of the match, stores 4 victory points. That's supposed to represent if the Space Marines have him, he's saved. If the cultists don't have him, he'll be sacrificed. So another side effect of this mission, and a nerf to the Space Marines, is they cannot use Auspex during this mission. And if you and your opponent see any Space Marine ability before the match that represents technology enhancing your vision, you can agree not to use it, because that was part of the gimmick of this chapter. All your technology wasn't working. And the last mission here is against the Greenskins. So this mission has some of the most intense scenes I've read in a Black Library book. The constant wave of orcs just piling into the line of the Iron Snakes over and over is amazing. Here the Space Marines will be the defenders, and the attackers will be the Greenskins. The deployment zone of the orcs will be far larger than the Space Marines, and they'll basically be on a line. And the orcs will also have a reinforcement zone. So the Iron Snakes have a few advantages here. The first one being a unique piece of war gear they each get without spending any equipment points, and that is a Sea Lance. I love this weapon in the book. Here it will be 4 attacks, hits on a 2-up, 5-7 damage, and relentless. But after the first time the weapon is fought with, it will break. I know they lasted a little longer than that in the actual book, because there was just a wave of orcs, but that's really hard to represent in Kill Team, so I basically gave it limited. There will also be 2 ammo servitors placed on the board as tokens. They can move 4 inches at the start of each turning point after strategic ploys are used. If a Space Marine performs a ranged attack while within 1 inch of them, the ranged attack gains ceaseless. The orcs have an advantage at the beginning of each turning point. For every orc that was killed last turning point, replace that model with an orc boy. This model will be placed in the orc reinforcement zone and must be 6 inches away from enemy operatives. This is to replicate that endless wave of orcs they are facing. There will be 3 objectives in the middle of the board. They do not score during the first turning point, but after that will basically be a hold 1, hold more. So this game will force a line in the middle of the board, and will just be a constant wave of orcs charging into the Space Marine line. This will probably be a fairly crazy match, but that's kind of what I was aiming for. So that's all the missions we're covering here. If you want to try these out for yourself, there's a Google Drive document in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.